What is up and welcome back. I thought that I would do a little bit of a different kind of video today. Over the years that I have been a videographer, filmmaker, and content creator, I've had a lot of people come to me and they either want to start YouTube or they want to just start documenting daily life, whatever the case may be, and they ask me what kind of gear they should get, like what kind of kit should they buy. And obviously this is a really kind of case-by-case scenario. You know, what I am going to recommend to you really depends more on what you're going to actually do with it. But today I thought that I would create a video about a piece of gear that I think could work as a pretty good catch-all, and that is a GoPro. I got my first GoPro back in 2019 for my birthday. And it's one of those things I never would have really thought to buy for myself. It's something that I consider more as like a piece of your kit rather than the kit that you actually use. And I think that a lot of people look at GoPros that way, and I think that they're a bit stigmatized as like not real cameras. But if you really kind of take a look at the macro picture when it comes to GoPros, they offer a pretty ridiculous amount of features for what you pay and just for what you have to actually carry around. So today's topic is going to be about using a GoPro as your main YouTube content creation camera. I'm going to walk you through the best settings to use for filming with the GoPro, as well as kind of the studio environment that you need to really make these cameras shine. And I will dive into kind of a pros and cons list of using a GoPro as your main camera towards the end of the video, so stick around for that. There are two main groups of people that I have in mind when making this video and that I think a GoPro would work best for, and group number one is those that are budget conscious. If you really take a step back and look at everything that the GoPro has to offer, you know, from 4K recording to the wide angle that costs a lot to achieve on a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, to the water resistance, just the ruggedness of the whole thing, and the compact form factor that really allows you to just take it anywhere, I think that it is a great all-in-one package for somebody that is on a budget, since you can get the latest model for about $400 for just the GoPro. And I'm shooting on the GoPro Hero 8 Black right now, which you can get for even cheaper. The second group of people that I would recommend GoPros to are those that just want to keep it absurdly simple. It's not like a camera that you got to carry with a strap or on a gimbal or anything like that. It really is just kind of this all-in-one kind of pocket wonder. And it's really cool for those that just want the simplest setup possible to just run and gun with. So now I'm going to do a settings walkthrough. We'll go behind the camera and I will show you the best settings to achieve a picture like what you're seeing now, because this whole video is being filmed on the Hero 8 Black. And then I'll show you my really simple studio setup that I have going on to kind of make your image as clean as it can possibly be. So let's go ahead and dive into the camera settings. Okay, so as we dive into the camera menu, there's really just a few things that we have to remember, and it's really just a set it and forget it kind of thing. As I've already said, I'm using a GoPro Hero 8 Black. Your menu may look a bit different, but all of the same settings apply. Let's go into our menu here and edit our settings. We want to make sure that we're shooting in 4K at 24 frames a second. 24 frames is widely considered to be the most cinematic frame rate. And I would have to agree. I really like the way that it looks, and I think that it shows up the best on video. But keep in mind, this is all subjective when it comes to frame rates. Shoot them whatever you want, but this is what I recommend sticking with. And for the lens, we're going to do linear. And that gets rid of that fisheye effect. If we go to the wide lens or the super view, we get that fisheye look that a lot of people don't like about the GoPro. So if we punch in and do linear, it just gives us a nice wide angle. We're gonna turn our hyper smooth off. Since it's gonna be mounted on a tripod, it's really not gonna make a difference, and it does crop into your image a little bit. If you're walking around and moving around, by all means, go ahead and turn it on. But for tripod use and kind of talking head content, we're just going to leave it off. So if we scroll into our Pro Tune settings, we want to set our bitrate to high. And all this means is that we're just getting the highest quality recording capability out of the camera. I recommend that you set that shutter speed to 1/48th of a second. And this is really important because it plays in with that frame rate that we set. So we have a frame rate of 24 frames per second. So we want to double that, and double of 24 is 48. And what this does is it gives you the most cinematic kind of natural motion blur, similar to what our eye sees. If we start to crank the shutter up real high, we'll start to get a bit more kind of choppy and frozen movement. Again, that's fine if that's what you're looking for, but to kind of get the most natural and cinematic look, we're gonna stick with 48. I recommend leaving the white balance at auto. The camera does a pretty good job at this. You can play around with it and kind of dive in and go and set it, you know, up and down. but I do recommend just keeping it at auto. It typically does a pretty good job. For our ISO, we want to just set the minimum at 100 and the maximum at about 400. This is another thing you can play with, but I find that if you push the ISO much higher than 400, it does start to distort your picture a little bit and introduce some unwanted noise. So keeping it at 400 is going to ensure that you have a pretty nice and clean image overall. Scrolling down a bit more, we want to keep our sharpness at low. And this is super important, probably one of the most important pieces of the whole thing. And it's because part of what people characterize as the kind of GoPro look that a lot of people don't like is due to the kind of over sharpening that the camera produces. And you can get around this by setting that sharpness to low. And that's really going to give you a more kind of soft and more natural looking image that isn't so kind of action camera-esque, if you know what I mean. So if you don't follow any of these other tips, definitely set your sharpness to low and you will notice a much more natural look. And for color, we just want to leave it at GoPro. It does give you an option to select a flat profile, which a lot of people would prefer for color grading, but I don't think a lot of us are aiming to be pro colorists. And I think that the GoPro gives you solid color straight out of the camera. Everything that you've been seeing so far is just the GoPro colors. And scrolling down, all of these other settings are really going to be up to you. You can kind of control your on-screen controls. So like right here, I have it to where I can select a different lens pretty quickly. And I've also got where I can select slow motion mode and a couple other things, but most importantly, what we just went through is the exact settings that you want to replicate. And again, it is set it and forget it. And you will have a great image going forward. So back to you in the studio. So all of those settings get you an image kind of like this, which I think is pretty darn good for a GoPro, because I think when people think about GoPros, they kind of think about that over sharpened image and kind of that fisheye look and some of those older features that you were locked into back in the day, but you're not locked into now with the newer features of the later models. I think that pushing that bit rate up and lowering the sharpness along with putting your shutter speed at that double your frame rate really is just the perfect combination for getting the most out of this camera. And lighting. These cameras require lots of light because they have a smaller sensor. Bigger DSLRs and mirrorless cameras tend to have larger sensors that do much better in low light, but GoPros are kind of more like a cell phone or a point and shoot camera that require a lot of light in order to get a nice clean image. And when you're outdoors, you may not be able to do that shutter speed rule just because if you lower your shutter speed that much, it might let in too much light and your image will be blown out. In that case, you'll want to grab an ND filter. But I don't think you should overthink it. You know, if you want to start putting content out there, just screw what the shutter speed looks like and just film what you want to film and put it out. It's really not that big of a deal. You can always add to your kit and get more into the specifics of things later. So yeah, when you're in the sun, this camera is pretty much always going to look great. But when you're in a studio setting, you're really going to want to blast light on your canvas in order to get a clean image. So I'll do a quick little tour of my studio setup, which, spoiler alert, is really just one light that's right here that is shooting a huge amount of light right onto my face. That's really it. I wanted to keep this as simple and effective and budget conscious as possible. So I'll go ahead and show you which light that I'm using and kind of how I have it set up. Okay, so now we are in front of the GoPro so that I can show you my lighting setup. I do have it lowered a little bit so that we can see everything better. Also, apologize for the messy studio right now, but anyway, let's go into the lighting. All I have here is just one big key light. And if you're not familiar with lighting terms, all a key light is just your main light in your setup, the one that produces the most light and the one that just really is responsible for bringing out your subject the most. I think this is super effective and something that really anybody can grasp and understand, and just, it's one light that points directly at you. It really doesn't get much more simple than that. And the specific light that I am using actually is the Godox SL60W. This light is an absolute tremendous bang for your buck, and it is pretty much a budget version of the Aperture 120D Mark II, which goes for over $700. I bought this light with a stand and a softbox for about 130 bucks, if I remember correctly. And the softbox is actually up there. I don't use it because it's just huge and cumbersome and it's a cheap one and it doesn't collapse or anything. I really like these umbrellas. You can get a pack of like 2 of these on Amazon for like 15, 20 bucks, and they really do roughly the same job. A lot of filmmakers and stuff out there will probably hate on me for saying that, but through my own kind of non-scientific testing, it really does pretty much the same job for me. And just the collapse time and the setup time on these is so much quicker than the big old softbox up there. and I would rather just have this set up all day. And again, for keeping things simple and budget friendly, this is the way to go. Now, let it be known that you can also use an LED panel or some cheaper lights or whatever you have. I like this one because it's just a good multi-purpose light. You can use this for portraits, for photography, and all kinds of other things. I really, really like this light. The bang for the buck is insane on it, and it's kind of a cult favorite on YouTube. There's a lot of videos you can find about it. And overall, I think it is a great buy. But again, anything that you buy, just make sure that you have some kind of diffusion like this umbrella for it. An umbrella is a pretty good option that'll work with anything. If you get some kind of square LED panel, whether it's budget or top of the line, you're gonna want diffusion. That's what softens the light and puts that kind of nice soft shadow on your face as opposed to hard, kind of like Godfather-like shadows. You really want that kind of soft cinematic look for the talking head YouTube style content. So now that we have lighting covered, the next major step that you want to kind of upgrade and try and get a little bit better is your audio. Now, let it be said that the audio straight out of the GoPro really isn't horrible. I'll go ahead and show you what that sounds like now. This is a test of the audio going straight into the Hero 8 Black, ignoring my lav right here. This is just pure GoPro audio. I do need to treat this room a little bit. It's probably a bit echoey even in my lav. This room, I really just need to add some foam or some blankets somewhere to fix that. But disregarding that, I think that the audio going straight into the GoPro is pretty adequate for most people. So if you had to choose between lighting and audio at first, I would go lighting all day because that affects your image the most. And audio is something that there are so many different options and you can get really caught up in it, but I'll tell you what I use and we'll go from there. I record pretty much all of the audio for my YouTube videos into a Tascam DR10L. And for what this is, you know, it's a bit expensive for some people, but it is really a perfect all-in-one package. It is a recorder lav combo for 200 bucks that really is just rock solid. It's feature rich and it gets you really good audio kind of in any scenario, and I really love the way it works. Now you can go another route with this and do like an onboard shotgun, like vlog style mic, and to do that you'll have to purchase a media mod depending on which model you get. If you have the Hero 8 or the newest Hero 9, you're going to have to buy the media mod for some extra cash in order to hook an external mic up to it. And the advantage of this is that the audio goes straight into the GoPro as opposed to this, which I have to sync up in post. But after buying the media mod and a shotgun mic, you're probably going to be in that $100 to $200 range anyway, so it's worth looking at something like the Tascam DR10L that you can use for all kinds of other things as well. So now that all that's behind us, let's take a look into the pros and cons of using a GoPro for your everyday content. Our pros: they're small, compact, they shoot 4K footage, they shoot insanely stable footage when you're handheld or running and gunning with it because of the hyper smooth stabilization that is in the GoPro, which is just next level, almost gimbal-like stabilization. It is accessory rich. You've got so many third-party manufacturers that produce quality and cheap accessories for these things that it's really a no-brainer. I think the kit that I bought of accessories for this thing came with like a chest mount, a head mount, a wrist mount, a bike mount, and all kinds of other things, and it was like 25 bucks, and I'll link that in the description below so that you can check that out. Another major pro is that they are so inconspicuous. Really, nobody's gonna bat an eye at you with this thing because GoPros and action cameras in general are so common at this point that when people see them, they're not intimidated. These are things that people carry on them every day, all the time. Another major pro is how rugged this thing is. It's water resistant right out of the box. You can practically take it anywhere. You know, throw a screen protector on the lens and on the back screen and you're set for the races. And I really love that about this, the fact that it can go anywhere with you. Whereas I would not take my $3,500 Sony a7S III with me on a hike or anything super sketchy like that where I knew that it could possibly break or fall. Another thing I really like about GoPros is that they are easy to use. You know, these things were designed for the average Joe. They were designed to clip on your person or walk around with and point at yourself and just have a great time. These weren't meant for, you know, hardcore filmmakers that want this perfect exposure and need all of this knowledge about composition and everything. These were designed to run and gun with and just to have a blast with. So I think that that is really working in its favor because anybody can pick one up and use one, and I really like that about it. The last major pro that I'll point out is that there is a huge knowledge base for these things online. There's all kinds of Facebook groups, all kinds of YouTube channels dedicated specifically to GoPros, and they're just such a well-documented piece of technology that you can find so much about online, and there will never be a shortage of tutorials or just kind of info videos about them, and that's a major plus because other pieces of gear you can't find so much knowledge online on, but GoPro's stuff is everywhere. People really like these things and they've always been talking about them. So now we will quickly dive into the cons. The first and most major one is going to be the small sensor size. And this is why the camera does not perform great in low light, and it's why you have practically no depth of field with this thing. You know, you're not gonna get that creamy, nice, blurry background on this. That's just not how it works. The next con is that you're pretty much stuck with a wide lens. Obviously, for the more cinematic content, we're using the linear lens, and you can crop in a bit further with digital zooming, but that's gonna start to degrade your image a whole lot, and I'm not a big fan of that, so I just like to stick with the linear lens. And you know, you pay big bucks for a wide angle lens on a DSLR, but you may not want to use that lens all the time. And as much as it is a good thing, it can be a bad thing for those that may want to get more of a telephoto look. The next con, which I've already kind of mentioned, is the low light performance. It does really suck that you can't really take this thing even into a moderately dimly lit place, just because the image really falls apart. It just gets super grainy and noisy and pretty unusable. There are workarounds for this, obviously, like the lighting that I showed you, and most of the time using one of these things is probably gonna be in the daylight when you're hiking, swimming, whatever, anything like that. But it would be nice to have a bigger sensor in these things and to be a little bit more confident when going into a low light situation that you'll be able to get a good image. I'm sure it's something that will come with later models, but for now, the low light performance just really isn't there. The final, and I would say is another pretty major con, is the fact that you have to buy the media mod in order to unlock certain features. Luckily, the newest Hero 9 has a front screen on it to where I can kind of see the framing, but on the Hero 8, I'm flying blind right now. I have no idea what I look like unless I go back and forth several times and check my headroom and check my composition and everything like that. And it can be cumbersome, but again, when you're on a budget and kind of working with those constraints, these are just things that come with that. You know, when you don't want to buy a monitor and all these external accessories, you're gonna have to put in a little bit more footwork, which really isn't hard when you take a step back, but it is annoying sometimes. On the Hero 8 Black, you have to buy the media mod if you want to see yourself and have capability with the HDMI port in order to run it out to a monitor or a TV or anything like that, and also to have the mic jack functionality in order to plug in an external mic to not have to buy a Tascam or something like I'm using right now. So wrapping up, I really hope this was helpful. I do think this is a great solution for somebody that wants to start out and maybe get their feet wet with YouTube. Not all of us want to film these crazy cinematic videos and be a filmmaker or a videographer or anything like that. Sometimes we just want to get up and running and produce content or document our daily life. And when you take a step back, I really think that the GoPro is a near perfect companion to do stuff like that. Especially younger people like teenagers or college students that don't have the cash to dump on a DSLR or a mirrorless setup. You know, a GoPro is extremely budget friendly, and it's a way for you to start putting out content today without draining your bank account. So ultimately, this is just food for thought. You're the one that's gonna know whether or not this will work for you and the type of content that you want to produce. But just for my 2 cents, pound for pound, I think the GoPro is a great option for the cheapest and most compact setup to get started with. Plain and simple. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Let me know if I missed anything. Let me know if there's any way that I can help you further with this, or if you want to film something different and don't think a GoPro would work for you, I'd love to help you figure out what would. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the support so much, especially on the last couple videos. We've been doing really well, and welcome to all the new subscribers, and I just really appreciate it so much. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching, and definitely remember that you are blessed and you are loved. As always, I'll be back soon.